So, a while back I made a video about aesthetics, about whether the regions in these open world gacha games actually shape their stories or whether they're just a really pretty wallpaper you walk past on the way to the next cutscene. And under that video, one comment showed up that I couldn't stop thinking about, mostly because part of it was actually right, which is an annoying thing to admit, way easier to just get defensive and move on with your life, really. But I sat with it for a while, read my own script a couple times, and I think there's a real chance I said something true and then explained it badly enough that it turned into something else entirely. So here's what I actually meant, and here's where I think they should have gone the first time. First, the easy part to clear up. A handful of people read that video as a ranking: Wuthering Waves good, Genshin fine, Star Rail bad, case closed. Which, if you spent any real time in gacha spaces, you already know exactly how this goes. Say one nice thing about the game's world building, and apparently you've committed treason against 3 other fan bases simultaneously. That wasn't the point. I wasn't ranking anything. Genshin and Star Rail were in that video because I genuinely love both of those worlds, not as a setup for a but. That's the small stuff though. Here's the part I actually want to slow down on. If you want the long version of what people argued, I pinned the comment thread on the last video. Fair warning, it's a genuinely heroic amount of reading. I'm not narrating all of that here, would be here forever. But buried in that whole back and forth is one distinction I think is the actual question. And once I saw it, I couldn't stop seeing it everywhere. Let's start with the belief underneath all of this, stated plainly, using a game I actually still play instead of a hypothetical. You already know it. Jinzo is described in the lore almost word by word as the throat of Huanglong, the border fortress, the last stronghold before the Tacit Discord threat. And the story there mostly lives inside that idea: siege mentality, duty, the exhausting weight of holding a line so everyone behind you doesn't have to think about it. Then we go to Rinascita. And this is honestly where I think Kuro actually starts figuring out what they're doing, because Rinascita isn't one region wearing one aesthetic. It's split into 2, and each half commits to a completely different emotional register. Raguna is all canals and echo-powered gondolas, gorgeous port city, maritime Venice. But underneath that beauty is a society obsessed with performance, literally. Its whole cultural foundation traces back to a massive stage play. And the city's religious order runs on rigid theatrical order, which is exactly why its horror isn't monsters clawing at you. It's psychological, things that trap you inside scripted roles until you forget who you actually were before the performance started. The place is obsessed with staging, so the thread that grows out of it is obsessed with staging too. Septimont, same region, completely different half, jagged plateaus, battle-scarred highlands, a colosseum where warriors settle everything through a grand physical tournament. No performance, no poetry, just legacy and grit. Its most sacred side is a graveyard where the bodies were never even found, just weapons left behind and the unspoken duty to keep carrying them. The threat there isn't psychological either, it's blunt, physical corruption, factions clashing over land and resources in the open. 2 halves of one region, and neither one could swap threats with the other and still make sense. Raguna's danger has to be a mind game, because Raguna is a society of performance. Septimont's danger has to be physical, because Septimont is a society of scars and inheritance. That's not 2 aesthetics sitting next to each other, that's the aesthetic actually deciding what kind of story gets to happen there. Then we got to Lahairoi, and a shift happened again. A school, coming-of-age atmosphere. The story following that completely. Growth, identity, figuring out who you are before the world decides for you. And now, we're at Suanfang Hold, on the way into Mengzo, which, according to the lore, wasn't built to be pretty. It was built specifically to contain a Tacit Discord outbreak. Its entire reason for existing is a containment problem. That's not set dressing, that's a thesis statement disguised as a map. 4 regions in, and each one keeps generating a completely different kind of story out of what it actually is, before a single character even shows up. That's what I mean when I say aesthetics is part of world building, not separate from it. The place isn't decoration sitting next to the plot. The place is what makes certain stories possible, and others basically impossible. Here's where it gets specifically interesting for the genre though. These games build region after region, each one aesthetically distinct on purpose. That's the entire appeal of the format. Genshin does this, Star Rail does this. You're not building one town with one history, you're building 6 or 10 completely different civilizations, each one announcing its own identity the moment you arrive. Which means the bar for does this place actually shape the story should be higher here than almost anywhere else. The format is constantly promising you the next region is going to mean something. If the aesthetic never reaches past the surface, that's not a small miss, that's the format failing at the one job it's uniquely set up to do well. And that promise is exactly what I want to actually test, not with a vague does the vibe match, but with something I think is a genuinely fair, specific standard. It's not does the place touch the character, almost every game clears that bar, it's does it stay. Let me show you what I mean with an actual scene. In 3.5, Yang Yang gets pulled into the fighting at Suanfang Hold. She survives, barely, and retreats into the hold completely spent. And that's when her power changes. Not in the fight, after it, once everything's gone quiet. She starts hearing what the wind remembers, actually hearing the echoes of what the soldiers stationed there have lived through. Days of it, all at once. And it builds slowly across the whole episode, instead of arriving as one clean cinematic power-up moment. By the end, she's singing through a battle she can't physically stand up in anymore, because the only thing left to offer is the ability to witness. That's the connection. The place is doing something to her, visibly, and it costs her something. Here's the part that actually matters though. That change doesn't end when the episode does. Whatever she's become is already set up to tie into the larger, still unresolved mystery of the game. Nobody's quietly undoing this once 3.5 wraps up. Now, here's where I have to actually say the thing I avoided saying last time. One comment argued I should have run this whole video through an actual world-building lens, the kind you'd get from writers like Le Guin or Sanderson, and honestly, I didn't do that last time on purpose, not because I was worried about being wrong, because I already knew what it would find, and saying it plainly turns into a takedown the second the words leave my mouth, even when I'm not trying to take a shot at anything. So let's just actually run it through that lens, once, properly. If you actually run Dunhang's and March 7th's Awakening through that standard, it doesn't hold. Sanderson has this idea that rules and consequences have to feel reliable, or the stakes built on top of them stop meaning anything. Dunhang's shift traces back to the Xiangzhou history, the Vidyadhara cycle, everything wrapped in that legacy. That connection is real, genuinely, I'm not disputing it. The problem is what happens the moment that region's arc is finished. It just reverts. Even if the powers technically stay in the lore, somewhere, narratively and emotionally, everything goes back in the box, base form, like the environment never actually altered them at all. And that's basically the opposite of what Le Guin always argued a setting should do, that a place's fingerprints shouldn't wash off the second you leave it. And here's what actually bothers me about that, more than the reset itself. If an awakening tied that deeply to place and history and identity can just get quietly undone the second the story moves on, what was the point tying it to any of that in the first place? What does shaped by the world even mean if the world's fingerprints wash off the moment you leave? And I want to be direct about this part, because I think I fudged it last time out of politeness. This isn't some abstract storytelling flaw that just happens to show up here. This is a Star Rail specific problem. Plainly, to me, an awakening that gets thrown away the moment its region's done isn't character development. It's a really good looking loop, dressed up to look like growth, which is exactly why Yang Yang's arc lands differently. Not because Wuthering Waves is doing something exotic or rare, because it's doing the obvious, normal thing correctly, letting consequences actually stay a consequence. So, if that's the real difference, connection that fades versus connection that sticks, I think there's a structural reason sitting underneath it. And before I get into it, one correction I owe here specifically, since this is exactly where it belongs. Last time I said Laofu when I meant the Xiangzhou alliance as a whole. 6 ships, not 1. That's on me, it's been a while since I played and the name I remembered best is the one that stuck. Corrected. And honestly, even with the fix, I don't think it changes the actual point. Because the point was never about how much screen time the alliance gets, it's about what kind of story the game is still telling there. Look at how Genshin handles returning to a region. Every year we go back to Liyue for the Lantern Rite Festival. Genuinely lovely. Also, structurally a closed loop. A seasonal visit back to a chapter the story already finished telling. Nothing there is expected to ripple forward into the main plot. Star Rail does something similar with the Alliance. We circle back to the Laofu here and there. We see its footprints elsewhere too. But it's small expansions, one update, a moment for people who remember it fondly. Same shape. Going back means visiting somewhere the story has already moved past. Wuthering Waves is doing something structurally different with Huanglong. Mengzhou isn't a nostalgic detour back to somewhere already wrapped up. It's the second city in a nation the game has barely scratched the surface of. And Kuros already confirmed there are 4 more cities waiting after this one. The story never actually left Huanglong. It's been mid-sentence there this entire time. And that's the part that actually explains Act 2 instead of just sitting next to it. Yang Yang gets to keep her awakening because the world she's changing in was never treated as a finished chapter. There's still narrative real estate for that change to live in, to keep getting referenced, to keep mattering 3 updates from now. Danhang and March 7th don't get that same room, not because anyone stopped caring about them, but because structurally the story already packed up and moved to the next region. There's nowhere left for the consequence to go, so it just doesn't go anywhere. That's the actual difference I was reaching for last time, and I don't think I landed it cleanly enough. It was never one game handles regions, one doesn't. It's that these games are making fundamentally different bets about whether a region is a chapter you close or a story you're still standing inside of. So, zooming back out, I still think aesthetics is one of the real pillars of world building, not some decorative layer sitting on top of it. And that matters even more in a format built entirely around region-to-region storytelling, because that format is constantly making you a promise that the next place is going to mean something. The bar has to be higher here. That's the deal you sign up for when you build your whole game this way. Was this an interesting exchange? Genuinely, yeah, even the parts where we disagreed. I'm honestly still not sure who to blame for the miscommunication in the first place. The gacha community's habit of reading every compliment as a takedown of something else, or just me not getting my own point across as clearly as I wanted to. Probably some of both, if I'm being fair to everyone, myself included. So here's what I actually want to ask you. When a big character turning point doesn't carry forward, when it just quietly resets once the arc's over, does that bother you the way it bothers me? Or is that just how you've come to expect these games to work, and I'm the one holding it to an unfair standard? And second, now that you've heard the actual distinction, connection versus consequence, is there a game out there doing this even better than Wuthering Waves? I'd genuinely like to know if I'm missing one. Anyway, that's gonna be all from me for this one. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more story discussions like this one. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.